As I told you in the first impressions of the Pixel 7a that I'll bring a detailed comparison with the Pixel 6a, and here it is. I asked you folks on Twitter if you would like a single video or two separate, one being dedicated to the camera comparison, and most of you voted for a single video. So hey guys, this is Shreyas and welcome back to another video for the full in-depth comparison between the Pixel 7a and the Pixel 6a. So let's check these out. Alright, coming to build and design, I absolutely love the design of the 7a. The 6a felt very pale in front and I really am digging the new colorway as well. I am switching to lighter colors unfortunately because Pixels have unfortunately glossy backs and fingerprints are way more visible on dark color glossy backs rather than light colors. You can see over here as well. Apart from that, the camera visor looks way more appealing in this particular colorway as well, and the addition of matte texture on the visor also adds to the feel of it, apart from the metal frame also being matte aluminium. Now in terms of the design, the front of the phone actually has Gorilla Glass 3. Both the phones have IP67 water and dust resistance, but the problem is both these phones have very pronounced thick bezels. Now on the 7a I felt that they were thicker, but actually what I realized is that it has a lighter color frame, because of which the bezels look thicker over here, whereas on my 6a the frame is actually black, so it kind of blends in and the bezels don't look as pronounced as on the 7a. Coming to the front of the phones, which is the displays, the 7a gets a huge addition of the 90 Hz refresh rate, which was a big drawback of the 6a. The animations look absolutely amazing now. It feels way faster in terms of day-to-day usage as well, thanks to the high refresh rate panel. One more thing on the display which has gotten a significant upgrade, at least in terms of launch time, is the fingerprint sensor. It is way more reliable, extremely fast, just like the Pixel 7 series. The Pixel 6a actually had a lot of issues with the fingerprint sensor at launch, and if you are not really aware of it, check the video out above in the card over here or down in the description. Rest about the Pixel 7a I shared in my first impression video as well, which you can check out in the link down below or in the card over here. Moving on, the display quality of both are not the best. You can get better displays in the individual price categories because a lot of Chinese OEMs offer 120 Hz refresh rate with higher brightness, but I did not really have a problem with readability outside under direct sunlight. Both of these actually feel like having the exact same brightness levels outdoors as well. Content consumption, at least indoors, is really good. The HDR slightly looks better on the 7a, especially in the shadow details. The color representation is also pretty good. Both of my displays were tuned to the natural color profile, which I prefer personally. Moving on, in the media experience comes the speakers. Now the speakers on the 6a are really good. It also had the adaptive volume setting, as you can see here, which the Pixel 7a surprisingly doesn't have, but the quality of speakers, at least in terms of tuning, is slightly better on the 7a. It is very treble heavy, really lacks bass, especially when I compare it to my Pixel 7 Pro. What happens is the distortion at the topmost level of volume is almost not there, where in the 6a you get very slight distortion at full volumes from the speakers. Both have stereo speaker setups, by the way. Now the haptics are really good on both of these phones. I don't think anybody should have a complaint with the haptics even at their individual price points, because they have almost close to flagship like haptics. The 6a had really good haptics for its price point, and definitely now that it's heavily discounted, it is probably the best haptic experience you'll get at this price. But the 7a is slightly more refined than the 6a. It's just something I felt while using them side by side. Next comes the battery and charging. Now about the charging, both are painfully slow. They only go up to 18 watts charging wired. But one big win relatively for the Pixel 7a is the addition of wireless charging. Now the wireless charging is limited up to 7.5 watts only, which is extremely slow. It is only suitable for overnight charging. Don't expect anything more out of it. One omission than the other flagships on the 7a would be reverse wireless charging. Although it has a coil, it does not enable that feature. I tried to find it out and even tweet it out as well. Make sure to follow if you don't want to miss out on voting on stuff or the minute details I notice from time to time and putting it out for my audience. Now the next thing is about battery life. Now about the 7a, it's a bit too soon to say, so I won't really comment as of now. What I will do is make sure to mention it in detail in my full review, because it will need some time to, for the adaptive battery to kick in, please refer to the full review battery section. I will make sure there are chapters in the full review so that you can understand in comparison to the 6A how it is. On the 6A, it's a kind of a sad story. When the 6A launched, it was kind of the battery champ. Unfortunately, be it Google's optimization, be it the software updates, or it could be the addition of 5G as well, the battery life on the 6A has gone down drastically. You can manage 5.5 hours of screen on time, or maybe 6 at times. And what makes the deal worse is that you have only 18 watts wired charging only. Now let's move on to the performance and benchmarks. Now this is not the strong suit of Pixels from day one. Over here you have specialized Exynos processors which are modified by Google and put into these phones. This has the first generation Tensor, which was not a great chip and does not hold a very good reputation in the industry, rightly so. Same with the Tensor G2 in the Pixel 6a. Here is a detailed throttling test. You can see that the Pixel 7a actually performs better, but it does throttle a lot after this 20 thread test load on over 15 minutes. You can see the average, maximum and the lowest performance is way higher than the Pixel 6a over here. Another thing, the benchmarks in terms of Geekbench 6, a very slight bump up, not anything huge or generational. You can check is the temperatures over here, which are different for this case. The Pixel 7a tends to be a degree or two cooler than the Pixel 6a, which is relatively good news. One more thing I have been reading on Twitter a lot is about the heating of the phone. I have extensively used it in broad daylight, but where I stay, you can see the temperature on my phone constantly in whatever recording I've done. It hardly breaches 35 degrees. People staying in north of India or wherever it gets way hotter, especially above 40 degrees, people are having problems shooting in broad day sunlight, because obviously the phone does get warm when you shoot 4K videos for a while or take a bunch of photos constantly, because it real-time processes HDR on the chipset itself locally. If you cannot shoot videos or photos after a while because of the ambient temperature, this is something you should keep in mind. That is also applicable for the Pixel 6a. Keep in mind that it happens sooner on the 6a than the 7a. This is not really great news, but it is what it is. Where you stay and how hot it gets is something that will matter. This was probably not as apparent to people because this launched late in July last year, when most of India was getting good enough rainfall and it was not as hot as peak summer. Next will be software features. I think the software is not really a problem for both of these. They are running on the latest Android 13 May security patch. The Pixel 6a did have one delay in terms of providing the security patch as far as I remember. So did the 7 series as well. Hopefully it does not happen for the 7a, but one thing is guaranteed, that when Android 14 hits, it will be first on both of these phones. One thing to keep in mind, given the price cut you get for the Pixel 6a, is that it will get 1 year of less platform and security update than the Pixel 7a. Usually both of these phones will get 3 platform upgrades and 5 years of security patches. So the Pixel 7a is right in line with the usual Pixel 7 series, the Pixel 7 and the 7 Pro, and the 6a is in line with the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro. There are still a few additions which were Tensor G2 exclusive. Now Magic Eraser worked on both of these phones and now is available to almost everyone who subscribes to Google One. The Unblur feature is now exclusively available on the Pixel 7a thanks to the Tensor G2 as per Google. We never know when the Google One subscription will start including that as well for all available phones and older Pixels as well. Now let's go on to the exciting part, or not so exciting part as per the camera samples you will be seeing soon. Let's throw up the camera section and the camera specs of both these phones on the screen right now. Now the Google Pixel 7a got a huge upgrade in terms of the megapixel count on the primary camera. Google used the same sensor, the IMX383 if I'm correct, on these phones. Now the exceptions were the Google Pixel 6, 6 Pro, 7 and 7 Pro, but for all of the other phones the primary sensor was the same. The advantage was that Google tuned the hell out of it and you got excellent pictures out of it, but the limitations of pixel size and the sensor size became apparent from time to time. A few things that are added to the camera this year has to be the front camera sensor as well. As you can see, it's a 13 megapixel sensor now. It is wider as well. Not to mention, it also can finally record 4K 30 FPS only, unfortunately not 60 FPS, but 4K video recording from the front facing camera as well. Also gets a new ultra wide, which is very wide. It is almost at 120 degrees of field of view. It is kind of wider than the Pixel 7 Pro as well. But let's find out now in detail about the camera comparison between the 6A and the 7A. The primary sensor doesn't have a lot of differences over here, although there is slightly higher shadow details in the Pixel 7A sample. But when you crop into 2x, you can see where the bigger sensor with the higher megapixel count can give you a slightly more sharpness, although this is a very well lit condition. Moving on, in this challenging HDR picture from the primary lens, you can see the HDR representation from the Pixel 7a is better. Shadow details you can see are significantly higher on the Pixel 7a while being a bit wider field of view on the primary sensor. But when you crop into 2x, there is not a lot of difference in well lit conditions, but you can see a more pleasing bokeh in case of the 7a sample. Where the 64 megapixel camera comes handy is when you punch in from the primary lens and go into zoom levels like you can see here. You do start to notice significantly higher details, although slightly more contrasty photos on the Pixel 7a, and that's where the bigger sensor with higher megapixel count and slightly higher pixel sizes come handy. In the ultra wide shot, this is probably the most challenging shot you can have, with where you can clearly see the Pixel 7a has very good dynamic range with decent shadow details and a good color representation while retaining sharpness in the picture as well. On the main lens, it's very comparable in good lighting conditions, but you can see a better bokeh and slightly higher shadow details in the primary lens of the Pixel 7a compared to the 6a. Moving on to low light sample is where you see more differences, because on the 6a you can see lesser shadow details while also having noise in the shadows, especially on the wall you can see significant noise compared to the 7a. The ultra wide is a clear win for the 7a again, because you can see weird artifacts and banding at the top right corner of the sample of the 6a with a lot of noise on the wall. The 7a is a way cleaner output with better shadow details. Same is continued here. You can see better exposure, better dynamic range and slightly more details on the 7a sample. Here is again where you can see the 7a dynamic range is way better while having better shadow exposure and better noise control in the shadow areas. When moving on to selfies, both do very well, but the 7a has a new upgraded sensor which is not only sharper, gives a better tuning in terms of color in my opinion. It is way wider as well, as you can see here, and both have equally good sharpness and dynamic range. Coming to portrait mode, it's still an Achilles heel for Google. See, the edge detection on my stray hair is not that great, although the color science of the picture is really good in terms of exposure, white balance and also skin tones overall. While discussing the camera specs, I mentioned how the Pixel 7a got a new sensor with a 13 megapixel resolution and also get 4K 30 FPS recording on the front facing camera while being wider as well. Let me know how the quality is. I can see some lens flares at time when I'm right against the sun, but otherwise I'm gonna walk around a bit for you to judge the stabilization as well, and also the mic quality, although I have speech enhancement on right now. This is 4K 30 FPS from both of the main sensors. I feel the 7A is a bit wider in the video mode, and let me know about the stabilization overall. It's in the regular stabilization mode with a sample of HDR over here. Now obviously we can go wider, you can check out the HDR even more. One problem with Pixels is that you can't change back to the selfie camera in between video recording. Let's crop in 2x. So yeah, let me know at 2x which one looks better, because given the new sensor, I'm hoping the 7a will perform a bit better over here. Alright, so now that you have all that, I hope you can make an informed purchasing decision if you're interested in these phones. The main attractive part of any of these Pixels is going to be the software experience. Now this time you get 90Hz to enhance that software and UI experience even more, with addition to few other features on Google Photos like unblur and also 4K recording on the front facing camera with a very wide ultra wide lens as well. Not to mention you get also wireless charging, although I will call it namesake given the speed at which it charges. These are what will enhance your Google experience overall, and this is not made for gaming very clearly. Also has the caveat of the Tensor G2 throttling its performance performance and also limiting the camera in a lot of places, which is kind of the biggest selling point of Pixels apart from the software experience. So keep that in mind if you are confused between these two particular phones. I hope this video clarified. If you have any more questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments down below. I will try to address all of those questions. Hope you liked this particular video. Drop a like if you did. Thank you for watching such a long and exhaustive video, but I hope it really helped, and I'll catch you in the next one with the full review of the Pixel 7a.